Hi, Stefano Molea here, San Diego criminal defense lawyer and partner at the law office of David P. Shapiro, where we help good people regain control of the future when charged with a crime. Today's video, I'm going to be talking about how do you decide whether or not you're being offered a decent plea bargain. Now, a plea bargain is essentially where the prosecution makes an offer to resolve the case, which usually will include some sort of guilty plea in exchange for a guaranteed outcome or a very structured sort of outcome. Now, when you're evaluating whether or not what's being offered to you by the district attorney's office or the prosecutor's office is any good, you've got to start at the very beginning of the analysis. And the first thing you have to do is you have to determine the strengths and weaknesses of your case. What would the prosecutor be able to do at trial? That's the end game, and that's how you assess the strengths and weaknesses and the leverages that you have. And so you go through the analysis of the evidence with your attorney. You discuss, here's how this evidence is going to be potentially interpreted by a jury. Here's how this set of evidence is going to be interpreted by a jury. And that's how you figure out, hey, what are the chances of me succeeding in trial, okay? That's where you start. Then from there, you look at, okay, well, what's the best case scenario at trial? Sometimes it's a full acquittal. Sometimes it's frankly a conviction to a lesser related offense or a lesser included offense. And then the worst case scenario, of course, is a guilty verdict, right? And if the jury were to find you guilty, what's the worst case scenario? So then you make that determination, because that's going to be something that you need to know to compare and contrast what the plea bargain is. So let's say that worst case scenario, you go to trial, you get convicted, and you can get 10 years. Okay, and let's say that based on the analysis of the case, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to be convicted. Now the prosecution is making an offer to resolve the case for 8.5 years. Most people would say, well, that's not a really good plea bargain, right? Because if I'm really only gambling about 1.5 years, I might as well take it to trial and take my chances and make the prosecution prove the case instead of me just kind of, quote unquote, laying down and accepting the deal. Now, on the other hand, if you could get 10 years in prison, but probation is on the table as a potential plea bargain, meaning you're going to do between 0 and 364 days or 365 days in custody, then that makes the decision a little bit easier, again, in a situation where you think you may be weak at trial anyways. Now, where things get difficult is when those sort of two sides, right, the worst case scenario at trial, on a good case, get compared to a plea bargain. And so in a situation, for example, where someone's looking at 10 years and you've got a good defense, and maybe they're offering you 2 or 3 years as far as a potential resolution, and having to serve 2 or 3 years in custody versus the potential of 10 years, but you've got a good case, that becomes a little bit more difficult. Frankly, as an attorney, all I can do is provide sort of the pros and the cons of each option to my client, do the best we can to analyze the case, and then determine, hey, look, here's what we think could potentially happen. There's going to be no guarantee at trial. You've got to decide, right? And there's a lot of factors that go into that consideration, that decision-making process, right? A lot of times for my clients, it's, do they have kids? How old are the kids? Are they married or are they not? Does their significant other have means to support themselves, or is there enough time for there to be a plan put in place so that the family can be taken care of while potentially they decide to take a deal and go into custody? Are there professional licenses at play? Is there immigration issues that need to be taken into account? So all that is going to factor into the overall decision-making process, but I just wanted to give you kind of a sense of how you make decisions and how you evaluate a plea bargain. Again, you start at analyzing the evidence. What can the prosecution prove? What's the likelihood that they're going to be able to succeed at trial to convince every juror on that panel beyond a reasonable doubt that you're guilty of the crime? You analyze the legal aspects of it, and then you compare and contrast what are they offering versus the worst case scenario at trial, or maybe the best case scenario, and then you work through those issues together with your attorney. All right, hopefully this analysis was somewhat helpful. If you have other questions, or if there's any other information I could provide that would be helpful to you, please leave it in the comments, and we appreciate you taking a look at this video. We'll see you next time.